Welcome to the Substack live video. I'm Seth Maskett, the host of Tusk. This live video thing is a first for me, so we'll see how this goes. I'm honored to be joined today by Alan Greenblatt. Alan was, until very recently, the editor of Governing magazine, serving in that role since 2023. He's the co-author of a textbook on state and local governments. He's previously worked as a reporter for NPR and for CQ and has written for many other outlets. Um, he has actually interviewed me a number of times, and we're turning the tables a little bit today. The reason I reached out to Alan is because he just announced that he was leaving his job as editor of Governing because his bosses there were instructing him to spike stories that were critical of the Trump administration. He wrote about this last week in an article at Politico. And I would say, compared to some other institutions, major universities, national newspapers, TV networks, software companies, institutions that have also changed their policies and arguably their values to accommodate the Trump administration over the past year, Governing is a fairly small actor. As Alan describes it, it's kind of it's the Rolling Stone of State of the State addresses. Um, but it's an example of a growing and deeply concerning trend. So, Alan, I really appreciate you being here. I have a few questions for you.
Sure, Seth, it's good to be with you. I respect your work a lot, so I'm glad to talk to you.
Thanks so much. Um, so you write in this Politico piece that you were facing increasing pressure from your superiors not to run pieces that were critical of Trump. I was hoping you could just give us an example or two of this kind of thing. Like what sort of pieces were getting flagged?
Yeah, it wasn't so much that way. It was more of a blanket policy. There were certainly stories that we published that drew some uh, criticism internally from within. I allude in the piece. We ran a piece about vaccines, and I was told that that was not a great choice because vaccines now are a partisan issue, and maybe we shouldn't have touched on that. Um, we had kind of a um, standing policy, more or less, to ignore culture war issues. Governing is mainly written for practitioners, and we felt like we could be of more service talking about how to implement programs and how to manage programs and things of that sort. We certainly covered policy and emerging trends, but there was so much coverage of culture war issues, abortion, transgender rights, etc. We kind of steered clear of that. And to be honest, I didn't object to that. We had a small staff. We did need to focus. But we did have one of our top executives, who I see is watching this event, say we shouldn't run negative articles that uh, could draw the attention of the Trump White House and have them shut us down. And things came to a head about a month ago, during that sort of peak week of free speech debate with the question of whether people could criticize Charlie Kirk after his assassination, and Jimmy Kimmel being suspended as the late night host for ABC after he made a comment about the politicization of Charlie Kirk's death. So basically, I wrote an article in favor of free speech and in favor of the First Amendment, and things had gotten sensitive enough that I did run it by my boss, who did not typically um, vet stories pre-publication, and she said we shouldn't run it. Um, that in fact our management had said we shouldn't. We should steer clear of things that might anger the Trump administration. And I said, well, to me, that's not an acceptable practice in journalism. So that's when I said I would quit.
Did they give you some sense of what they thought might happen if you did run this piece?
Um,
Not
no,
to you necessarily, but to the overall organization.
no. I mean, it was, there was part of what made it difficult to argue against. There was no imminent threat. I mean, this is an organization not just governing, but its parent company has no federal contracts. I mean, Trump is a litigious figure. He has sued
Mhm.
ABC, CBS, Associated Press, the New York Times, etc. So it's not fantastical to think he might put heat on us, but there was no indication, um, lightning might strike. There was no indication that that could happen. And we didn't really get into what might happen. It was more that I said it was not acceptable to be censoring ourselves, and that if I were to stay working there, I would want some assurances about editorial independence, and these were not forthcoming.
Mhm. Do you have a sense of uh, when you started experiencing this pressure? I mean, did this policy go in right at the beginning of the year? Did this come later? Was it response to a certain moment?
It was a response to Trump taking office, I think.
Okay.
And in fact, so we have governing had a regular staff meeting on Tuesday. Trump was inaugurated for this term on a Monday. So the day after he was sworn in, we had our meeting, and I said to the staff that already at that time we were seeing uh, people and institutions with way more power and resources than we had kowtowing to him. And I said that we were not going to do that. That as since we covered state and local governments as a federal official, he was not mainly our story, and that obviously we would be fair to him, but when warranted, we would be critical. And someone in that meeting presciently asked, "Does upper management share that point of view?"
Hmm.
And as I said, it turned out not. That it wasn't just a directive toward me. It was stated in meetings that we should not criticize Trump. Um, so that was partly my motivation for quitting. In fact, was that was a promise that turned out I could not keep. I felt like I could not protect the publication in that sense, and so therefore I couldn't run it.
Um, I think what you're touching on sort of a larger challenge in journalism in general right now. You mentioned in there that you thought the organization should be fair to Trump, and that's I think correct, but also it needs to be honest. And I think fairness to some means trying to be even-handed, and any critique of one side is also you have to add a critique of the other side. Um, Whereas another approach might be if he's doing more of the problems, you focus more on that. I'm just sort of wondering how you all manage that sort of discussion there.
Yeah, I was just talking yesterday to somebody who used to be with the Texas Tribune, who said uh, they would get complaints from Texas Republicans that they were always running negative stories about their policies, and they're an organization that tries to play it straight and so forth. And this guy said, "Well, we talked to one legislator said Democrats aren't in power." So um, at governing, like say, we're primarily not concerned with Trump, but he was unavoidable because he has been a major change agent president, particularly in this term. When you think about things like the nearly $1 trillion worth of Medicaid cuts and so forth, I mean, it was not possible to ignore Trump. And A majority of states are run by Republicans as well. It's not just that they run Washington. So there was, I think, I did have some debate with my boss about um, my position was taking Republicans seriously and taking their ideas seriously did not mean never being critical. Um, and it sort of cut the other way too. There was sort of an aversion to controversy, which manifested itself. It was just an email, but the governing awards or not, we I should say we, but they anyway have a long-standing awards program called Public Officials of the Year, typically honor a governor, a mayor, a legislator, and so forth. And the governor this year was Greg Abbott of Texas, who, of course, is a Republican and very partisan figure himself. And There was a little bit of email from above. We should be prepared for controversy on that. It wasn't just a fear of Trump or even a fear of liberal bias. It was sort of a fear of controversy. There was,
Mhm.
uh, I had some discussions where there was a desire to, like I said earlier, to write about how government is managed, how things get done, and so forth. And I think there was a desire to pretend that partisanship and the polarization of our era could be tuned out, and that wasn't part of the equation for people in government. And we should ignore that as best as possible and just, write about the nuts and bolts of governing. And so, this was part of my issue too, is how do you reflect reality if you're going to ignore major dynamics?
Hmm. So, obviously, as you point out, governing is not the only institution responding to this moment this way. We've seen many other media organizations and universities and businesses and others seek to accommodate Trump rather than end up essentially on his enemies list. Um, what you've done here is courageous, and I'm curious if you've seen examples of other individuals, other institutions that have pushed back well. Like where have groups been successful?
Um, the only reason I wanted to write about what happened to me, like, I'm clearly not a public figure, um, is because it's sort of like, I hate to use this comparison, but if you see one cockroach, there are 30 other cockroaches nearby.
Hmm.
So the fact that there was this capitulation, this censorship in advance, um, troubled me because you never know where else is happening. People don't announce. I mean, maybe Tim Cook hands Trump a gold bar on national TV. Maybe Qatar gives Trump an airplane, but people don't quietly say, "I'm not going to criticize Trump." But what's happening, and just anecdotally, and talking to lots of people, lots of organizations, uh, I know there are medical associations that don't use the word equity anymore, even though that has a totally different meaning in their context than it does in the DEI context, or at least a partially different meaning. There are think tanks that I know have had meetings about, like, what can we touch on and what should we avoid, and so forth. So we know this is happening, uh, particularly in this term. And so, yeah, my purpose in writing was just to highlight that. And in my piece in Politico, I mentioned there are other journalists who have quit or been fired.
Hmm.
You know, not exactly the same, but basically the same issues. There were reporters in Alaska. I think there are three or four who quit at once because they had written a piece that characterized Charlie Kirk in a way that a Republican state legislator objected to, and the piece was changed after it was published. So they quit. There was the head of the Illinois Press Association who quit because his board wanted him um, to leave a lawsuit that had been filed, basically over how to cover press access to ICE protests in Chicago and so forth. Um, we just saw John Dickerson step down from CBS because I haven't seen him issue a statement, but it seems pretty clear that he had been critical when CBS paid Trump, was it $15 million to
Hmm.
settle a lawsuit about his complaint about how a 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris had been edited, which, Paramount, of course, denied had anything to do with the desire to sell to the Ellisons. But John Dickerson commented on that as a CBS employee, and now has left as Barry Weiss takes over the news division. So you know, a lot of what we know about Trump is still coming out of journalism. There's a sort of different vibe to this term. In the first Trump term, the Post had its slogan, "Democracy dies in darkness," and people subscribed to the Post and the New York Times. as part of their resistance toolkit and so forth. I don't think particularly the Post wants to position itself that way now, but they are covering uh, a lot of what we know about what's happening in the Trump administration is still coming through reporters. I mean, and I guess the highlight example was the essentially entire Pentagon press corps walking out
Hmm.
rather than accepting the mandate that they only print what the Department of Defense or Department of War um, would hand them. So yeah, journalism is a place of quote resistance, I guess, if you want to frame it that way. But no, I mean, I'm not an expert in this. I'm sure there are other individuals who've quit their jobs. I mean, we know there are CDC officials who left because they just felt like they couldn't operate under that circumstance where science was being devalued, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that was a really good point you made about the Pentagon journalists. Um, so I work at an institution that pretty overtly capitulated to Trump administration demands on a number of items this past summer, especially DEI initiatives. Um, I did not have the chutzpah to leave. I'm curious, do you have advice for leaders, consumers, citizens, others who want to sort of resist kind of demands that erode the integrity of their institution, but they're wary of walking away from a steady salary?
So I'm not an activist myself. I would say that there there's a collective action problem where Trump has been very shrewd about picking off individual universities and attacking them uh, separately and making separate demands on them. And the same with law firms and so forth. So if I'm part of an industry that is under attack or it, I should say being challenged, I guess I would be thinking about like what can I do with my peers? Is there some way I can join? I would, I hope people can think about the difference between short-term decisions and long-term decisions. That it's easier um, to fold under pressure when you have an administration that is willing to prosecute its opponents, and penalize them in different ways. That does engender fear. But do you want to live in a society where that is a reigning dynamic? Um, in terms of personal advice, I would never think to tell anyone what they should do about their livelihood. That is a highly personal thing. Um, but I would say, we all make compromises in our jobs. We all do things that maybe we would do differently. I think that goes for people making protein powder for orphans. No matter how holy the work, we're part of institutions that sometimes make decisions we don't like. But I think on the other hand, most of us would not join the mafia. So somewhere between those two things of having to not be naive enough to think your job is going to be perfect and not murdering people, somewhere there's a line. So for everyone, that's going to be a different place. For me, being told as a journalist I shouldn't publish an article defending free speech was a clear line.
Yeah.
And I think, again, I would never advise this to anybody. Um, but if you are the sort of person who would think about, am I going to stand up as a matter of principle and leave my job? Just be smart. Like think in advance. What line am I not willing to cross, and where am I looking in the meantime? How do I prepare for that moment? Should it come? If you're a person who would make that kind of choice.
Great. Thank you for that. I guess there's one more question is, what do you see as next for you? And how can interested people follow you?
Um, well, I'm pretty findable on the socials. Alan Greenblatt. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. It's at Alan Greenblatt. And I don't know what's next for me. I did not take the advice I just gave. I did not have a plan. I had discussed with my boss um, my feelings earlier that if we um, weren't going to do journalism of the type that I wanted to do, I would quit. And so, but I did not. I was not. I guess I don't know. I guess I thought maybe it wouldn't come to that or whatever. I didn't look, but I'm looking now. Um,
Mhm.
I've always been an active freelancer. I expect, um, I'll keep looking. Journalism is not the most robust industry uh, these days. I'm not completely confident I'll get another job in this field, but we'll see. If I have to do something else, I'll do something else.
Well, thank you so much. I know you said you're not a public figure, but me and my 58 viewers are really trying to change that for you. So I really appreciate your time. And thanks to everyone who tuned in today to watch this. And good luck to you.
Thank you. Thanks, viewers.
Okay. Take care.